Okay, so last time we ended on justice. We were talking about justice in general. I kind of rushed through special justice, so maybe we'll revisit that a little bit um, today, and then we'll talk about what he says about natural justice. And this is going to lead us into a discussion of what's known as natural law theory. This is a popular ethical approach to ethics, natural law theory, and it's a separate branch. It's a different type of ethics from Aristotle, but some people read Aristotle as being a natural law theorist. So we'll talk about what that means and see the debates on both sides. Is he really a natural law theorist? Is he not? We had a similar conundrum last time when we were talking about hedonism. And when Aristotle says all this stuff about pleasure and pain and how they're tied to virtue, it makes it seem like he's a hedonist. Well, some of the things he says about natural justice here, it's not that they make him sound like a natural law theorist. They make it kind of iffy and ambiguous, or it's not really clear. So we'll read this part, and then mainly what I wanted to cover today is his view on friendship, and that shouldn't take us too long. So hopefully, this meeting, like I said last time, will be a bit more casual, shorter, informal. I hope. We'll see how long it takes me to get through all this stuff, but that's the game plan for today. Um, I don't think we're going to have time to get to book 10, and all this sort of stuff about intellectual virtue. And he, makes, some more remarks about virtues of character and politics. There's a sort of a transition into political philosophy. I doubt we're going to have time for that today, and I don't want to rush through it. So I think just wrapping up what we have left here for justice and doing friendship will probably be more than enough to fill up this final meeting, this final class. So let's start. If you have your textbook, the Aristotle selections, let's start on page 395. And at the very, very top. Okay, so we were talking about justice in general, and in one sense, justice in general is it's what ever produces and maintains happiness, and its parts for a political community. That's I'm reading directly from the book. That's 393 at the top. So that's sort of the justice in general. So it has to do with the political community maintaining each part, how they all fit together, right? That's general justice. Special justice, right? Or specific justice as a special virtue. We read a few quotes last time, but this is some new stuff. Starting at the very, very top of 395. We must describe special as well as general justice and injustice, and equally this way for a thing to be just or unjust. Let us then set to one side the type of justice and injustice that corresponds to the whole of virtue. Justice being the exercise of the whole of virtue, and injustice of the whole of vice in relation to another. It's evident how we must distinguish the way for a thing to be just or unjust that expresses this type of justice and injustice. For the majority of lawful actions, we might say, are actions resulting from virtue as a whole. For the law instructs us to express each virtue and forbids us to express each vice in how we live. Moreover, the actions producing the whole of virtue are lawful actions, and laws prescribed for education promoting the common good. Skip that next paragraph. He says, special justice, however, and the corresponding way for something to be just must be divided. One species is found in the distributions of honor or wealth or anything else that can be divided among the members of a community who have share in a political system. For here it is possible for one member to have a share equal or unequal to another's. Another species concerns rectification and transactions. This species has two parts. One sort of transaction is voluntary, the one involuntary. Voluntary actions include selling, buying, lending, pledging, renting, depositing, hiring, etc. Those called voluntary because the principles are some are involuntary or secret, such as theft, adultery, poisoning, pimping, pimping, slave deception, murder by treachery, false witness. Others are forcible, such as assault, imprisonment, murder, plunder, mutilation, slander, insult. So these are special vices, special virtues, and when we rectify them and we make good on them, then this is a special type of justice. So it's justice with reference to one particular virtue. But in a general sense, though, justice really involves all the virtues. And so this ties in a lot to what Plato says. And you might even say he's indebted to Plato from the Republic here. This idea that justice binds all the virtues together, that if one is just, if you have justice, you have all the other virtues. And if you don't have justice, you can't have any of them. One thing, he doesn't really come out and say it, and I don't think really Plato does either, or maybe I missed it. But one thing that I think you can draw from this is that you can't really be virtuous fully or completely in a society that's unjust. So if things are not just, if you don't have a just system or a just society, virtue and just actions are impossible. So this general justice, this sort of ordering of all the parts of the city and making sure that everybody has a place in the city and does their job right and fits into the whole correctly. This general justice makes all the specific virtues and specific just acts possible, and the violation of it makes them vices. Okay, what about natural justice? What does he mean by natural justice? Let's continue right where we left off. This is at the bottom of 395. Aristotle writes, this is chapter 7 of book 5 of the Ethics. He says, one part of what is politically just is natural. The other part is legal. So when we look at laws in the polis, when we look at laws in the city or any sort of government, any state, I guess we could talk about a nation state today. For Aristotle, that there are parts of this that are natural and parts that are legal. Okay, so what is politically just, what is right, and what is good in the city is sometimes a matter of just what's naturally right, and sometimes it's a matter of what's legally right. So he distinguishes between the two. And this is why I don't think that he's a natural law theorist. Natural law theory basically says that what is natural is what is good. And so whenever you want to judge whether or not something is ethical or unethical, you look to its nature. Is it acting in accordance with its nature, or is acting against its nature? There's I would say, quite a temptation to read Aristotle in this way, because in a very deep sense, I think he's kind of saying that we all have an inner nature, we all are aiming towards some telos, and it's good, it's virtuous when we fulfill that aim, when we become the best version of ourselves and we flourish. That's eudaimonia. That is a virtuous activity of the soul. And so this lends itself to a reading that, oh yeah, well, it's natural, it's good. But then he also mentions the fact that when we enter into contracts with other people, this is maybe the part of him that is not the natural law, that's a different type of justice, right? There's a sort of justice. In fact, he doesn't even like to use the term justice in terms of fulfilling one's telos, because that might be something that's good for yourself. It's just only insofar as you fulfilling your telos is good for the whole. Right? What's good for you is not just good for you. It's good for you, yes, but if you fulfill your telos and achieve happiness and you flourish, I guess the idea for him is that you will benefit all those around you, your friends. We'll talk about friends in just a moment here. So it gets a bit fishy here. Is he a natural law theorist? Someone like Thomas Aquinas is going to say that all laws are based on natural laws. If they're not, they're evil, okay? But Aristotle seems to think that there's such a thing as convention, and it's still good too, that humans are rational and we do things that are fitting, and sometimes what's fitting for one community might not be fitting for another. These might be matters of geology, geography, culture, tradition, whatever it is. This semester we didn't have time to get into the politics, but we would have been able to discuss it in more detail if we would have looked at his politics, the next book that is in your selections here. But let's restart again. So natural law, right? What is politically just is natural, and the other part is legal. So part of the political laws, what we term justice in a political sense, is what springs from nature, and some of it is based on laws, on legality. What is natural is what has the same validity everywhere alike, independent of it seeming so or not. It is just good or just by nature. This is something that I think maybe he might say every polis would share, insofar it's a good polis, insofar as it's a good city state, a good political organization. They would always have to share in what's naturally good. But the legal points might differ. Yeah, I remember one of my professors when I was teaching, when I was learning ethics, was he used this interesting example of how you might have different expressions of the good, but underlying it is the same aim. So perhaps like the example he gave a couple times, I think, in class was cultural clashes between Japanese and American businessmen during like the late 80s and the early 1990s, when Japan was really booming technologically, especially in the automobile industry, and it was becoming a lot more easy to export automotives. And so Japanese cars were becoming, really really big. A lot of people wanted to own Japanese automotives. So there was a lot of investment in Japan. Well, there was this difficult issue that kept springing up in the early stages of negotiations between American and Japanese businessmen due to a difference of culture. So what would happen is the Japanese businessmen would usually storm out of the meeting very quickly, about 5-10 minutes into the meeting, and the business people were like, "What the heck's going on? Did we do something? Did we say something offensive?" And one of the problems that was common was that the American business people would bring lawyers to their meetings, to the business meetings, and that was seen as offensive. That was seen as an insult to the Japanese, and they thought that it was a sign of mistrust. Once they found out that the guy sitting next to this American business person what was a lawyer, and he was just there to make sure everything was legal, then they thought that was a sign of distrust. And so the American businessmen, it's not that they did feel that way, but that's how it was taken. So these cultural signifiers might be different. Underlying it, they both probably wanted to be respectful towards each other, but the way that they expressed that respect. So respect and fairness might be something that is natural, Aristotle might say, that is a universal. But how one shows respect and how one shows fairness might vary from culture to culture, based on tradition, based on the geography of the culture and how they developed in response to that geography. All sorts of different things, right? If it's a seafaring culture versus, like a mountainous or whatever, right? All these things might have an effect. Okay, but again, what is natural is what has the same validity everywhere alike, independent of it seeming so or not. What is legal is what originally makes no difference whether it's done one way or another, but makes a difference whenever people have laid down the rule. The mina is the price of a ransom, for instance, or that a goat rather than 2 sheep should be sacrificed. And also laws passed for particular cases, that sacrifices should be offered to precedas, for instance, and enactments by decree. Now, it seems to some people that everything just is merely legal. Since what is natural is unchangeable and equally valid everywhere, fire, for instance, burns both here and in Persia, while they see that what is just changes from city to city. So they're relativists, they're cultural relativists. I think we talked about relativism earlier this semester. There is no right or wrong. It all depends on the culture. That is not so, says Aristotle. Though in a way it is so, right? It kind of is and it isn't. He's got this distinction between what's naturally right and what's legally right. And the legal, that might change. The natural doesn't. Okay? Once we decide what the value of a dollar is, and what the buying power of the dollar is, that is something we could have chosen a different value for. But once it's decided that a dollar should buy this much food or this much whatever, we need to stick with that. Otherwise, it's unjust. You can't treat it differently for different people. But the sort of initial decision itself was rather arbitrary, etc. So for Aristotle, it says in a way it's so, in a way it's not so, right? Relativism, this idea. So with us, though presumably not at all with the gods, there is such a thing as what is natural, but still all is changeable. Despite the change, there is such a thing as what is natural and what is not. What sort of thing that is changeable and hence admits of being otherwise is natural, and what sort is not natural, but legal and conventional, if both natural and legal are changeable? It is clear in other cases also, and the same distinction between the natural and unchangeable will apply, for the right hand, for instance, is naturally superior, even though it is possible for everyone to become ambidextrous. The sort of things that are just by convention and expediency are like measures. For measures for wine and for corn are not of equal size everywhere, but in wholesale markets they are bigger, and in retail smaller. Similarly, the things that are just by human enactment and not by nature differ from place to place, since political systems also differ. Still, only one system is by nature the best everywhere. Okay, all that he just said, in a way, it's somewhat clear, right? He's distinguishing between a legal and a natural right. And he seems to think that these differ in the way that wholesale versus retail works, right? Maybe the natural laws are more wholesale and apply more broadly, whereas the legal the ones are more retail and they apply to more individual states. But then he backs up at the end with that last quote, and this is why I think that it's kind of fair, perhaps, depending on how you want to read him here, it's kind of fair to call him a natural law theorist, because he sees that very last sentence, I'll read it again. He says, political systems differ, still, only one system is by nature the best everywhere. So there's going to be a best one, and it's best by nature. Nature is what makes it best. Um, if you read the politics, I think the best reading of it for me, what I take from it, and this is probably going to come as no surprise, is that the Greek system is the best, right? If you go east, it's not free enough. And if you go west to the Europeans and all those Germanic tribes up north, they're too free and they're too wild and crazy. But the Greeks are kind of in the middle, right? They've got like the sort of spirit of the barbarians, but they've got the order of the Eastern, right? The Chinese and the Persians and all those. So Aristotle thinks that his civilization is the happy median, the golden mean. And that's the naturally best one. So that one way of reading Aristotle is that. But other people, I guess, more subtle readings of Aristotle is that really you can't judge the goodness of any political system unless you know the goal of that political system, unless you know the telos, what is the aim, what is the purpose. And if that system is very good at fulfilling its purpose, then it's a good system. And so that's how you determine it. But then there's other readings of Aristotle that say, okay, well, that's true, but there is a best aim. So some political systems will have a better aim than others. So the best system is the one that has the best aim, and it'll naturally be the best. So anyway, enough about that. I think I've talked too much about justice and all this stuff. Let's get to, we're skipping book 6. Let's get to our very brief exploration, unfortunately, of friendship. This is in book 8. So where are we at here? This is on page 417 is where this begins. And he's going to talk about all the different varieties, all the different types of friendship. So I've got all the different types of friendship listed here conveniently, but we're going to read his quote, Well, a couple quotes I have here, and then we'll unpack what all these are. What's the difference between a friendship of pleasure, friendship of utility? What is a true friendship? And then we'll talk about why is this important to talk about in the context of ethics? What is it about friendship that makes it? What is essential about friendship that makes it a necessary component of a virtuous, happy life? So he begins book 8, chapter 1, by saying, that the next topic is friendship, for it is a virtue, or it involves virtue, right? It is a virtue, or if you don't like me to call it a virtue, at least it involves virtue. And besides, it is most necessary for our life. It's a necessary element. You got to have friendship. You're not going to be fulfilled without friends, right? Without philia, right? Without the sort of love or care for other people who also care about you. The sort of reciprocal caring. So no one would choose to live without friends, even if he had all the other goods. For in fact, rich people and holders of powerful positions, even more than other people, seem to need friends. Okay, so even if you had everything you wanted, all the wealth, even if you had all the pleasure you could ever get, if you had no friends, it'd be pretty miserable, don't you think? But according to him, there are 3 types of friendships, and really the one that's super essential is the third. But the first 2 might be necessary steps, in preparation towards the true friendship. Now, at the top of 419, let me read this really quick before we get to the 3 types. This is at the top of 419. He says, love for a soulless thing is not called friendship. If I love my keyboard, or not my computer keyboard, but my synthesizer, I love my guitar, I love my my home gym, right? Like, these are things I love, but I don't have a friendship with them because there's no mutual loving. So friendship always has to involve a mutual love. And you do not wish good to it. I don't know. Maybe I do wish good for my home gym. I don't want to get too screwed up. If somebody messed it up, I'd be pretty upset. But that's because of my own selfish reasons, I guess. It would presumably be ridiculous to wish good things to wine. The most you wish is its preservation. Yeah, he pretty much just responded to me there. It's not that I want good for my gym. I want it to be preserved and in good working order so that you can have it. Okay. To a friend, however, it is said, you must wish goods for his own sake. I want my home gym I don't want somebody to come in here, like, I let my friends use it, but if they start banging it up and throwing dumbbells around and scratching up my rack and stuff and, throwing weights on the floor, then I'm going to get pissed off, right? But that's because I'm going to use it. But when I want my friend to do well, I just want him to do well because I just want him to do well. I care about him. If you wish good things in this way, but the same wish is not returned by the other, you would be said to only have goodwill for the other. For friendship is said to be reciprocated goodwill. So that's his sort of, I guess, general definition of friendship. Reciprocated goodwill. You wish them well, they wish you well. In what way, though? In what way do they wish you well? Right? And that brings us to the 3 different types of friendship. We skip there to chapter 3. He says in that second sentence, friendship has 3 species corresponding to the 3 objects of love. Each object of love has a corresponding type of mutual loving combined with awareness of it. And those who love each other wish goods to each other insofar as they love each other. Those who love each other for utility love the other not in himself, but insofar as they gain some good for themselves from him. The same is true of those who love for pleasure. For they like a witty person not because of his character, but because he is pleasant to themselves. Okay, so now we get the first 2 types, right? The first one he mentions is the one of utility, and the second is the one of pleasure. What is he talking about here? Like, how else would you describe this? What's he saying? Like, what's a friend of utility?
Like you're only using them for like their money or their presence or something, something like
Right.
that.
And you're useful to them too, maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this could be like, I don't know, like a business partner or something, a colleague, right? Like you associate with each other and but it's only because of that advantage, right? You get something from each other. And something similar with the friend of pleasure, but it has nothing to do with like I'm not using them for anything besides amusement, I suppose. They're fun to be around. I guess like a drinking buddy, one of my party friends or something like that. But for him, these friendships are not so strong because the object of the friendship is pleasure, utility, and what pleases us and what is useful for us is not constant. And so these things change. And so the moment that the pleasure is not there and the utility is not there, the friendship dissolves. So these aren't as solid a friendship. At the top of page 420, that first paragraph, he says these friendships as well as the friends are coincidental. Right? They just happen to happen. Right? They're coincidental. They're not necessary friendships. Since the beloved is loved not insofar as he is who he is, but insofar as he provides some good for the utility or pleasure for the friendship of pleasure. And so these sorts of friendships are easily dissolved when the friends do not remain similar to what they were. For if someone is no longer pleasant or useful, the other stops loving him. All right, well, what about true friendship? Or actually, I should probably, because I think in your textbook, he uses the translators, they use the phrase complete. So let's put that complete friendship. Right? This is the true friendship. So at the bottom of 420, a complete friendship is the friendship of good people similar in virtue, right? So we're at a similar point in our development. We're similar in virtue. We wish goods in the same way to each other insofar as they are good, and they're good in themselves. Hence, they wish goods to each other for each other's sakes. Now, those who wish goods to their friends for their friends' own sakes are friends most of all, for they have this attitude because of the friend himself, not coincidentally. Hence, these people's friendships last as long as they are good and their virtue is enduring. Excuse me. So, these kind of friendships are he says they're rare. We're going to get to that in a minute, but they're more enduring, right? Because they're based on a reciprocal goodwill that is beyond just usefulness and pleasure. We want them to be the best version of themselves that they can be. We want them to be the most complete human being that they can be. And this is not something that can be gained immediately. These sort of friends are friends, they take time. It takes time to develop these kind of friendships. We have to live with each other for a while and interact with each other, get to know each other's character. Whereas a friendship of pleasure or utility, these are easy come, easy go, right? I mean, it's easy to get pleased or find something useful in somebody immediately. But as he's saying, that's a pure coincidence. Goodness and virtue are things that we want constantly in our lives. And so someone that helps us develop those traits and who we can actually benefit as well, for him is a complete friend. And these friends might actually not be pleasurable sometimes. They might tell us something that we don't want to hear. They might tell us some uncomfortable truth. A friendship of pleasure or utility might be doing something completely self-destructive, and we wouldn't care. We'd be like, yeah, they're crazy, they're nuts. I don't know, that person's wild. But if it's somebody that we really care about, we're going to pull them aside and say, hey, man, look what you're doing to yourself. You need to stop that. You need to get your life together. So we'll give them these hard truths, right? These are the friends of the complete friend. But like Aristotle says, they're rare, right? As he says on 421, that last paragraph in chapter 8, or chapter 3, they skip a lot here. So chapter 3, the end of chapter 3, they jump all the way to chapter 9. These kinds of friendships are likely to be rare, since such people are few. Moreover, they need time to grow accustomed to each other. Right there it is. It takes time to develop. For as the proverb says, they cannot know each other before they have shared the traditional peck of salt. And they cannot accept each other or be friends until each appears lovable to the other and gains the other's confidence. Those who are quick to treat each other in friendly ways wish to be friends but are not friends, unless they are also lovable. And know this, for though the wish for friendship comes quickly, friendship does not. Okay, so we've sort of laid out all the not all of, but sort of the essential traits of complete friendship. Let's see how he elaborates on this in um, in chapter 9, where he talks about friendship and communities and kind of the different varying levels of friendship. And if anyone is familiar at all with Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, ancient Chinese mainly political, ethical, also philosopher. Um, there's been a lot of comparisons made between Aristotle and Confucius, and I think that this chapter is good evidence of that, where he talks about the kind of friendship between our fellow countrymen, friendship between family members, friendship between lifelong acquaintances, that I guess aren't really acquaintances at that point, lifelong, um, and the different levels of commitment that's involved to each one. He says, what is just is also different. This is at the top of 422. What is just is also different, and is not the same for parents towards children as for one brother toward another, and not the same for companions as for fellow citizens, and similarly with the other types of friendship. Similarly, what is unjust towards each of these is also different, and becomes more unjust as it is practiced on closer friends. It is more shocking, for instance, to rob a companion of money than to rob a fellow citizen, to fail to help a brother than a stranger, and to strike one's father than anyone else. What is just also naturally increases with friendship, since it involves the same people and extends over an equal area. Now, this is an element of Aristotle that I think is quite at odds with some of his the people that he influenced, some of his progeny. You could argue that Aristotle had a deep impact on Epicureans, the hedonists, but also I mentioned last time, I think I mentioned the utilitarians, people like John Stuart Mill. But even people like who weren't directly influenced so much by Aristotelian ethics, people like Kant and other ethical philosophers, they seem to insist on impartiality. That when you're making a judgment of what's right or wrong, you shouldn't treat anybody better than anybody else. Everyone should get an equal treatment. And I shouldn't treat my mother any different than anybody else. They're all equally valid as ethical agents, and so they should have an equal amount of respect. But it gets complicated. Mill has a bit of a defense. He's like, well, kind of, sort of, but obviously there's exceptions must be made. He's not very clear about it. But Aristotle just comes out and says it. No, you do owe more to your brother than a stranger. You do owe maybe more to your fellow countrymen than just some strangers. So there are these sort of levels of friendship, and some of them, when actually you screw someone over who's closer to you, it's even worse than when you screw someone over who's not as close to you. They're both bad. He's not saying that like one is excusable and then one isn't, but there's a sort of level of intensity that if you betray a friend, that's much worse than betraying a business partner or something like this. Um, let's read that second to last paragraph there towards the bottom. He says, all these communities, right? My family community, the political community, community of all chess players, if I'm a chess player, community of all musicians, if I'm a musician, whatever, right? There's these like sub communities within the larger community of humanity, and they have different sort of, we have different obligations to each one, he seems to be saying. So these communities would seem to be subordinate. All these communities would seem to be subordinate to the political community, since it aims not at the advantage close at hand, but the advantage for the whole of life. This is where he gets a bit controversial, maybe not so much when he was writing this, but in the course of history, it's become controversial. He's making this claim that the overall aim of the entire political community is the best one, and it should be the highest concern, and all the other concerns should be subordinate to it. Um, I think it'd be hard for Aristotle to envision a society like ours functioning in the way that it does. It wouldn't be homogenous enough for Aristotle, where there are too many different interest groups with too many different opposing viewpoints. I don't think he'd be able to see how this could work, right? How could you have a society, for instance, where you've got a certain percentage of the population who believe in one religion and a large portion who don't? And how could they all agree on what is right and what is just? That would be a big problem for Aristotle. So this claim that, and even it kind of seems to, even if you don't take into account the history of politics since Aristotle and how cultures have become much more multicultural, societies have become more multicultural. You could even push back a bit here because he doesn't seem to be super consistent himself with what he said earlier. Shouldn't you have more obligation to certain friends? Should you turn your mother in to the government if she breaks the law, or should you just like maybe let her slide? Is your obligation to your mother or your brother, isn't that more important than to like the state? Aristotle would say no, the state must be the higher one, unless it's an unjust state, I suppose. Then there might be some loophole to get you out of that. Now let's skip forward to book 9. Let's see. What do I want to read? Well, I'm actually not going to read any of this, honestly. I'm going to skip all of it. I'm going to be lazy here. I'm going to take the easy way out. Why do we need friendship to be virtuous? Why do we need to be virtuous? Well, one need is that we need friends as examples to help us, but we also have to help friends, because part of the virtues are being generous, being just. Many virtues like bravery, temperance, he seems to think that they couldn't be acted. You couldn't do anything good if there wasn't anybody to do good to. So you need to have a community of people who you care about. Otherwise, I guess the more obvious example is right where we started off with is justice. How are you going to be justice if justice concerns how different parts of the community fit together and how everyone's doing the right job? There's no community without other people. There's no community if you're some hermit who's just sort of ignoring everybody and living off in your cave, right? So friendship would seem to be necessary. And even if you don't agree with, or maybe you do agree with once you hear it, but maybe you're not aware of Aristotle's conception of happiness. Even if you're just thinking of happiness in very, very simplistic terms, and somebody just says, hey, could you be happy if you had no friends at all? Most people would have to say no way. And so it seems pretty obvious that if happiness is a part of virtue, or virtue is a part of happiness, then friendship should also be included there, because you certainly couldn't be happy without friends. How are we going to wrap things up here? I really said all I wanted to say about friendship, and I'm trying to figure out how to close the class up. Now, let me get into some pretty critical stuff about Aristotle. I, by the way, happen to be a very big fan of Aristotle. I think his writing is not the most engaging. It's not fun to read him, but I think he's a pretty strong philosopher. He's probably in my top 5, maybe, certainly my top 10. So let me put that on the table before I tear into him. I'm going to bring up some of these criticisms against Aristotle. Now, one thing that is often leveled against Aristotle, and particularly in this context, in regards to his ethics, is that teleology
is not ethics, or it's not a good approach, right? It's not a proper approach to ethics, right? What do I mean by that, and why? Okay, so teleology, Aristotle's philosophy in general, not just his ethics, but his metaphysics, his physics, his biology, it's all teleological. So he's not alone in this. Aristotle is not the only ethicist to take a teleological approach to ethics, right? Aristotle's ethics, sometimes referred to as virtue ethics, is just one example of teleological ethical approaches. Utilitarianism. We're not going to talk too much about utilitarianism, but this is another ethical position that is teleological. There is a goal, the greatest happiness for the greatest amount of people, the least pain for the most amount. The greatest, the ethics that adheres to the greatest happiness principle, right? That's the aim.
That if an action is right, if it helps a large majority of people, right?
Right. Action is good if it increases the amount of happiness for the people overall, and it's bad insofar as it prevents happiness or causes pain, right? So that's just another approach to ethics that's also teleological. Now, some critics of this approach are going to say, well, how do you know the aim is good? How do you know that the telos is good? You haven't really established that the telos is good. So all that teleological ethics can tell you is that, okay, here's this aim, and here's how you achieve it. And here's the best way to achieve it. And here's a bad way to achieve it, right? And here's the way you won't achieve it. But it doesn't tell you why you should achieve it and why it's good to achieve it. So, for example, we could do like a teleology of football, American football, right? Gridiron, not soccer, you know what I mean? So I suck at sports. I don't know anything about sports. I don't watch sports really. I like to watch a good boxing match, or if like my buddy's got the UFC on or something, I might watch a good fight. But I don't know crap about football. I do know the telos, I guess. So if we were doing a telos on football, I could at least start. I know that you want to win the game, okay? So when you play football, what is the aim? Well, the aim is to win, right? Okay. So how do you win? How do you go about winning football? Well, you have to score more points than the other team. Pretty simple. You could do a teleology on football. You could talk about, all right, well, we've got this aim, this telos, which is winning the game. And you could talk about perhaps things like, well, what is it that is going to help you win more points? What kind of, how much, you got touchdowns, you got field goals. You can start talking about all the different positions that each of the players played. This kind of ties back to the beginning of when we started off, like what makes each individual player unique? What is their uniqueness? What is the quarterback supposed to do? Like, what is their function? What is the job of the quarterback? What is their function? And given that function, what sort of unique characteristics would make you a good quarterback or a good running back or whatever? Those are like the only two positions I know, right? What is it? Tight end, there might be physical characteristics. If you're bigger, you'd be a better running back. I don't know if that's true, but I'm just, like I said, I suck at this stuff. But anyway, so you could do a teleology of football. You could talk about coaching strategies, how to be effective at this. Well, the problem is, though, after you've constructed a teleology of football, have you explained why it is good to play football? Why it is right? Why you should play football? Well, the critics are going to say no. All you've just said, well, and so that they're going to say the same thing about Aristotle here. All he's done is he said, okay, well, here's this goal we have. It's called happiness, and I'm going to define it as a virtuous activity of the soul. We all aim towards it. We all want it. And I'm just going to describe the type of actions and the type of activities that lend themselves towards it. And so some will say, well, all you're doing is describing a process. You're simply describing a process. You're just observing. And you're telling us, look, here are these things that are called virtuous, and here's how people achieve them. But you haven't provided a foundation for your ethics. You haven't provided a foundation for why it's good to be virtuous. And in many cases, Aristotle kind of seems to admit this in so much. He says something, you might have caught this in the reading, we didn't really cover it in class, but he says certain things like, look, if you're looking for a reason to be good, I can't really give you one. Like, you should already just want to be that. I'm writing for gentlemen, for sophisticated people, for honorable people. If you push me for a reason, then that's, you just, I can't give you one. I guess you got me on that. You just already have to want to be virtuous. But luckily, he's going to say, you already do. Most of us already do. Unless we've been corrupted by vice or bad influences or malnourishment, we weren't properly raised or something. Maybe we live in an unjust society. We have this natural inclination, he's going to say. We naturally aim to be the best that we can be. So as long as we are surrounded with a good community of people with good established laws that encourage us to achieve our highest achievements, we have friends and family who do this as well and encourage us to excel, then there's just this natural movement towards that, says Aristotle. We naturally want to be that way. We don't need a reason. It's already in us. We're already impelled towards it. But some might still push back. The critics might push back and say, but still, Aristotle, this all sounds really good because you're talking about, and you're making all these assumptions. You're making these really bold assumptions that we all really want to be good naturally. That's that, right there, you might not accept that. But let's just say that we all want to be happy. We aim for happiness. Well, just because we aim for something, just because we want something naturally, doesn't mean it's necessarily good. So just because there's a natural inclination, so all humans are naturally inclined to achieve X. X is good for the sake of itself and not good for the sake of anything else. Therefore, good X is ethical. That last step is questionable to the critics. They're going to say just because something is desired for its own sake, just because humans want happiness naturally, and just because we want it for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else, that doesn't necessarily mean it's good. What if we naturally wanted to destroy? I was just watching that Rick and Morty episode. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where Morty gets this robot pregnant and the robot has this evil baby. Well, he's not evil, but it's in his nature to want to destroy. The baby, he's from this planet of really aggressive male beings who are I want to destroy and kill and murder. They have this natural instinct. So, the critics to Aristotle would say, well, in that case, it would be good to murder. If we naturally want to destroy and murder and conquer and dominate, maybe that's not what we want. Someone like Nietzsche might push back, say, well, we kind of do, will to power, that's a totally other topic. But let's say we did have a natural desire to murder. I hope we don't. I don't feel like I do. I hope you don't either. But let's say we did. We all naturally want to kill everything we see moving. Does that make it good? No. So just because we naturally want to be happy and we want to flourish doesn't mean that it's good. Now, I, for one, don't care. I'm not, this is the critics that I'm mentioning here would be people like Kant or people like Plato, or even people who loved Aristotle but still thought he was wrong in this regard, people like Aquinas, right? If you got Plato's going to say there's got to be something that is just good. It's just good in itself, and it's the basis for all other things that are good. And for Aristotle, it's more like, no, there does have to be this one being that all things aim towards. We talked about that in his metaphysics, but there doesn't have to be one good for all things. You know, what's good for me might not be good for you, etc. There doesn't have to be this goodness itself, and it doesn't have to be somehow based on some intellectual argument that's absolutely foundational. So Plato, Kant, he's not going to like this too much. Kant thinks that ethics has to have a very solid foundation that is self-justified. For Kant, he's going to argue that you find it in the self, in the sense of reason, the rational being. All rational beings are intrinsically valuable because they're able to understand what is valuable, and that itself, they can act on it. So if you're a rational being, which you are, and you're taking the class and you're listening to language, so you're rational in that sense, then you have intrinsic value. And that's the foundation for his ethics. You got Aquinas, who basically, he is a natural law theorist. We began the lecture talking about natural law theory. And so he grounds right and wrong in nature, and nature ultimately is created by God. So God is sort of the ultimate foundation, this eternally perfect, absolutely omnipotent being that is eternal. And that sort of grounds his ethics. But Aristotle he leaves a lot to be desired if you are a foundationalist with regards to ethics. Now, the term foundationalism, we're going to end class on this, right? So let me wrap things up. Foundationalism is usually a term that you're going to find in a class on epistemology. Epistemology is theory of knowledge. So usually when you hear the term foundationalism, it's in an epistemological context. So you're asking things like, how do you know what you know? And this kind of came up, I guess, a little bit in Aristotle, because he is a bit of a foundationalist in one sense. He thinks that there can't be an infinite regress of reasons. If this thing happened because of this thing, and this thing happened because of that thing, and this is for that, there has to be an ultimate for the sake of which. There has to be an ultimate terminus that all things are for the sake of. And so otherwise it just keeps going on forever. And so he is a bit of a foundationalist in this regard. He also seems to think that there have to be certain principles that other principles are based on, and those original principles have to be self-evident and foundational. We talked about one of them, or actually a couple of them in this class. For Aristotle, for instance, the law of non-contradiction. This is just true. It's just true. You don't need to demonstrate it, although you can demonstrate it. You can't deduce it. But it is just true, and if you deny it, you can't have any sort of truth. And so it is just self-evidently true. It's the foundation for this. But when it comes to ethics, Aristotle doesn't seem to be a foundationalist in ethics. You could argue he is with his happiness, right? Happiness is the terminus, that happiness is the ultimate aim that all humans aim at, and it's a self-sufficient aim. You could use that as a foundation for his ethics, but still you'd have to keep asking, well, why is happiness good? It might be good for the individual, it might be good for society, but why is it just good universally? Like, why is it just good apart from anything? Why is it like platonically good, And Aristotle's going to say there's no reason for that. Like, that's where it ends. There is no foundation beyond just what I've given you, that we want to pursue happiness for its own sake. We all naturally do. It's good for ourselves. It's good for the political community. If you need a reason beyond that, that's more abstract, philosophical, and just universally applicable outside of all contexts, you can't get it. I'm sorry. If that's not enough, then you're reading the wrong book. You already have to want this stuff. And he's assuming you already do, and that you're just kind of pretending. You're just kind of being a dick and playing devil's advocate. And I don't think that's true in the case of Plato and Kant and Aquinas. I think they sincerely think that having an ethical foundation is essential. It has to be self-evident, and it's what gives truth to all other ethical statements. Unfortunately, though, I think in all their cases, there are flaws with their foundation. Some of their arguments for their, we saw Plato in this class. We didn't do any medieval philosophy this semester, so we didn't really, we kind of skipped Aquinas. But I'm sure if you ever take a class in ethics or you take a class in modern philosophy, I'm almost positive that you will cover Kant. So anyway, that's all I had to say there. I actually probably said more than I planned, but I guess I think all you guys for showing up this very last day of class. You are the survivors. You're the rare few who made it to the end of the semester. Don't forget your Aristotle metaphysics essay is due in a couple of days, and your final essay on the ethics will be due on the 16th. So let me stop recording. I'm going to go ahead and end the lecture now.